Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly hidden crisis. We're talking about the deep, often silent isolation experienced by older men. But we're not just going to look at the problem. We're going to explore some incredibly powerful, community-driven ways to prevent it. So, let's jump right in. What actually happens when the very people who've spent their entire lives feeding our country suddenly feel like they just don't belong anymore? It's a startling reality. We're looking at older male farmers here. For these guys, farming isn't just a 9-to-5 job, right? It's their entire identity. It's their way of life. But as they get older, the landscape of their mental health and social connection can shift dramatically. And the outcomes, well, they can be absolutely tragic. I want you to think about this number for a second. 74.2%. According to CDC data, that is the staggering percentage of farmers 65 and older who completed suicide and were diagnosed with depression. Nearly 3/4. It highlights a severe epidemic happening completely under the radar in rural communities right now. This isn't some minor blip in the data. It's a massive, glaring red flag that our older agricultural workers are falling through the cracks. Section 1. A hidden public health crisis. To actually solve a problem like this, we've got to understand the very specific pressures that create it in the first place. When we compare different age groups, a super clear pattern pops out. For younger farmers, think those under 45, the heavy stressors are mostly external. We're talking financial strain, legal troubles, job issues. But as these men age, that landscape completely flips. For farmers 65 and older, those primary life stressors drastically shift to profound physical decline and the heart-wrenching loss of family and friends. And you can't ignore the dramatic spike in physical health acting as a direct catalyst here. For the younger guys, physical health only contributes to about 5.9% of these cases, but for the 65 and older crowd, it skyrockets to 53.9%. Farming is literally back-breaking work. When a lifetime of that intense labor catches up with you and chronic pain sets in, these older men suddenly face severe isolation simply because they physically can't do the work that defined who they are. Section 2. The roots of isolation. Let's look at the psychological weight these men are carrying. Researchers use something called the interpersonal theory of suicide to explain this, and it basically breaks down into two core concepts. The first concept is a bit of a mouthful. It's called thwarted belongingness. In plain English, it's that crushing feeling that you lack social connection and mutual support. Imagine a guy who has worked the exact same fields for 50 years. When his body gives out or his social circle shrinks as friends pass away, he loses that daily connection with his community. He steps out of the tractor for the last time, and suddenly he feels like he's stepped entirely out of society itself. Now, compound that total lack of belonging with something called perceived burdensomeness. This is the truly fatal belief that you're so flawed you've become an active liability to the people you love. For an older farmer whose whole world was built on being the strong provider, physical decline feels like an absolute failure. They start believing this devastating lie that their inability to work makes them a burden to their families. Section 3. The stigma of silence. So why aren't they just reaching out for help when things get this dark? Let's talk about culture and geography. It is basically a perfect storm. In a lot of rural regions, mental health is deeply, deeply stigmatized. It's just not something you sit around the diner and chat about, right? Plus, there's barely any access to mental health services out there anyway. And remember, a farmer's identity is tied directly to their ability to work. If they admit to cognitive or mental struggles, there's a very real, terrifying fear that they might lose control of the family farm or even lose their bank financing. So they stay quiet. They navigate this immense stress completely alone. In the sociology world, there's a term for this: fatalistic suicide. It's an old concept from Durkheim, and it happens when someone feels utterly trapped by stagnant, helpless conditions. They feel they have zero control over their circumstances. When a man can no longer function the way he used to, and his culture essentially forbids him from asking for help, that overwhelming helplessness and role confusion just take the wheel. Section 4. The power of generativity. Now, I want to be super clear. This narrative absolutely does not have to end in despair. We're pivoting now to a really powerful, actionable solution. The big turning point? Uniting generations. We can actually move away from this tragedy of isolation and step into something incredibly empowering, and it's built around a concept called generativity. This is how we start building those bridges. So, what exactly is generativity? It's all about fostering open conversations, encouraging mentorship, and building an intergenerational identity. Basically, it's older generations actively sharing their hard-earned wisdom with younger folks. Think about how perfectly this smashes that feeling of being a burden. When an older man mentors a younger farmer, he isn't a liability anymore. He's a vital, respected, and deeply needed source of knowledge. Section 5. Building healthier communities. Okay, theory is great, but how do we actually make generativity happen in our own local towns? A really beautiful way to picture this is by looking at nature. Think of a person's life like a growing plant. The roots are their environment, the rural landscape, their family history. The trunk, that's the sheer strength of their individuality and the life they've built over decades. And reaching outward, you have the branches. This is cultivating experience. This is where generativity actually happens in real time. It's about branching out, connecting with others, and forming a protective, collective legacy that is strong enough to outlast any single season. To grow those branches, the research points us to 3 actionable steps. First, we have to create mutual learning spaces, actual forums or community groups where different ages mix. Second, foster responsive mentorship, meaning younger people are actively encouraged to seek out their elders' advice. And third, keep an open dialogue to shatter those stigmas we talked about earlier. By doing this intentionally, we bridge the gap and let both sides learn from each other. When a community pulls this off, the ripple effects are just incredible. It prevents what experts call generative mismatches, ensuring the advice being passed down actually makes sense for the modern needs of the younger crowd. It builds huge mutual respect. This kind of structured connection honors who the older adults were in the past, while actively weaving their relational wisdom right into the fabric of the future. It literally inspires new movements. But to make this a reality, we need a practical framework. We can't just cross our fingers and hope these connections magically happen. We have to proactively map them out together. And that brings us to the idea generator. This takes the academic theory of generativity and turns it into a real-world playbook for community leaders. Whatever program you're building to connect generations, you want to ensure it is inspiring, diversifying in the perspectives it includes, empowering for the older adults involved, and above all, highly actionable. Ultimately, the goal here is pretty simple but incredibly profound. We need to emphasize the immense value of past wisdom. We need to empower our older generation to share it without any fear of stigma. And we need to create a sustainable environment where everyone feels they truly belong, regardless of their physical capability. So I'm going to leave you with an urgent challenge based on everything we've unpacked in this explainer. What actionable steps can you take right now to ensure the older men in your community never have to suffer in silence? Whether it's starting a simple conversation, asking an elder for advice, or setting up a dedicated mentorship space, the power to build these bridges is entirely in our hands. Thanks for tuning in, and I really hope this inspired you to look at your own community a little differently today.